everyone. So, in today's class, we will be discussing on the topic of post-Keynesian school. The discussion will consist of previous school of thought and their contribution like the classical theory, the Keynesian theory and the post-Keynesian. Who are the economists involved in their theory, how it is different from new Keynesian and the Keynesian theory. Criticism to post-Keynesian theory. Before the publication of Keynes' first book of macroeconomics, namely the general theory, the doctrines which prevailed were known as the classical theory. It is worth studying the classical theory of income and employment for a simple reason. Certain aspects of the theory are relevant to the existing conditions in today's developing countries. So, before starting the Keynesian economics, first we will discuss the various aspects of classical model. Classical model. He is Adam Smith, who is considered the founder of classical economics. The classical model was popular before the Great Depression. It says that the economy is very free and that the prices and the wages freely adjust to the ups and downs of the demand over the time. In other words, when times are good, wages and the prices quickly go up, and when times are bad, the wages and the prices freely adjust downward. The major assumption to this model is that the economy is always at full employment, meaning that everyone who wants to work is working and all the resources are being fully used to their full capacity. Classical economists believe that economy is self-correcting, which means that when the recession occurs, it needs no help from anyone. So that's the classical model. So there were some preliminary observations on the classical model. So let's discuss. The classical theory of income, that is output, and employment determination is based on two basic notions. First, the Say's law of markets. According to the classicists, the level of income and employment is governed by the fixed stock of capital and the fund from which wages are paid, called wage fund. They believed that due to the operation of the law known as Say's law of market presented by the French economist J.B. Say in 1803, an economy would always reach to the point of full employment or near full employment. The Say's law states very important thing, that supply creates its own demand, which means that an increase in the production achieved through an increase in society's stock of fixed capital will be sold in the market. The reason is that there will be no lack of demand for any extra output which is produced. Second, wage price flexibility and full employment. According to the classical economist, there is no possibility of involuntary unemployment in the capitalistic economy. All those who are willing to work will get the jobs at the existing market wage rate. Now, talking about full employment, Spencer says full employment is a situation in which everyone who wants to work is working except those who are frictionally and structurally unemployed. So, what does these words mean? Frictional unemployment. It is a temporary phase of unemployment in a dynamic economy. It occurs due to immobility of labor, shortage of raw material, shortage of power, breakdown and machinery, etc. Structurally unemployment. It is a direct result of mismatch of the work and the work skill. There are many problems like shortage of supply of good factors of production. It could happen in a long run period. So this is about the classical model. Now let's discuss the assumptions of the theory. Capitalistic closed economy. A closed economy refers to the country that produces all its own goods and services and doesn't participate in international trade. Closed economies are virtually non-existent today, although some countries come closer than others to having one. Classical theories are believed in long-run period without inflation. There is full employment situation. We have talked about this already. Perfect competition in labor market, money and product market. There are homogeneous labors means ready to work at the existing wage rate. The total output of the economy is a part of consumption and the investment expenditure. Money is a medium of exchange. Non-technological change. Prices and wages are flexible in nature and savings is equal to the investment. The law of diminishing marginal returns is applicable to the agricultural sector. So after the assumptions, now let's discuss the implications of the classical theory. It gave importance to the full employment. Involuntarily, unemployment was absent. Under the perfect competition, general unemployment is not possible. Plus, decrease in money wages tends to decrease the real wages also. Wage and the price flexibility occurs according to the Say's law of market. So, due to the Say's law of market, there is no overproduction and general unemployment issues. So, people spend their entire income on consumption and investment. So, where even savings are equal to the investment. And the rate of interest can be changed in accordance to the equalize the savings and investments. So, now let's discuss the criticism on classical theory. Professor J.M. Keynes, who wrote the General Theory of Employment, Rate of Interest and Money in 1936. In this book, he criticized the classical theory of employment and strongly clashed with Say's law of market. Keynes argued that during the Depression, Say's law does not work. According to Keynes, equilibrium income and full employment income is not the same thing. Keynes also criticized on Pogue's approach regarding the wage cut. He trusted that involuntary unemployment arises due to the deficiency of demand due to fall in the income of the laborers. The determination of aggregate output and employment level is called as the general equilibrium. He rejected the laissez-faire policy. He believed in the short run and so criticized the theory ignored problem in the short period. Now let's talk about the Keynesian model. John Maynard Keynes is considered as the founder of Keynesian economics. The second model is the Keynesian model. This model came about as a result of the Great Depression. Economist John Maynard Keynes observed that the economy is not always at the full employment. In other words, economy can be below or above its potential. During the Great Depression, unemployment was widespread. Many businesses failed and the economy was operating at a level below its potential. When John Maynard Keynes was observing the Great Depression, he realized that the economy could be well at its potential for a long time and that something was causing it a great stuck. It may be self-correcting like the classical economists were saying, but it was taking way too long. In the meantime, people were losing jobs and were suffering. So Keynes believed that government and monetary leaders should do something to help the economy in the short run or a long run may never come. The classical model does a great job of describing the economy in the long run, where resources are fully employed and everyone is working. The Keynesian model, on the other hand, does a great job of describing what happens in the short run, where there's a recession and people are out of the work or when the economy is temporarily overheating and a shortage of the workers takes place. So this is an important point to be noted. So now let's talk about the Great Depression. The Great Depression lasted from 1929 to 1939, almost 10 long years, and were the worst economic downturn in the history of industrialized world. It began after the stock market crash in the October 1929, which sent the Wall Street into a panic and wiped out millions of the investors. Over the next several years, consumer spending and investment dropped, causing a steep decline in industrial output and employment, as failing companies laid off the workers. By 1933, when a Great Depression reached at the lowest point, some around 15 million Americans were unemployed and nearly half the country's banks were failed. What were the causes? Let's talk about the causes of Great Depression. First, the production declined and unemployment had risen. Consumer debt was proliferating. The agricultural sector of the economy was struggling due to the drought and falling food prices. The banks had excess of large loans that could not be liquidated. The American economy, which entered a mild recession during the summer 1929 as consumer spending slowed and unsold goods began to pile up, which in turn slowed the factory production, and the stock prices continued to rise. So, simple understanding of Keynesian model, that is SKM. So, Keynesian model distinguishes first, actual GDP is what GDP happens to be right now. Potential GDP is full employment GDP. Equilibrium GDP, it is a level of GDP at where there are no forces tending to change the level of GDP. The most important assumption of this model is that the prices are constant. In the short run, firms stand ready to supply whatever output their customers want at the given prices. Thus, the demand is a ruling force in this model. If the demand is strong, real GDP exceeds the potential. In recession, when demand is weak, the real GDP drops below potential. So, we have discussed the assumptions for the classical model previously. In the same manner, there are certain assumptions to this Keynesian model also. So, first, it is one sector model which includes only the goods market. There is absence of monetary sector. Third point is, it is static model. The model solves the static equilibrium level of real output, which is the value of real output. There has no tendency to change once it has been established. Closed economy with or without government. There are constant prices and it is a short run model. Fixed stock of the capital and labor. The model assumes that both the stock of capital and the labor force, which when fully utilized determine the maximum level of real output of the economy can produce are constant. Profit maximization. It is assumed that firms act as profit maximizers. If the demand for the output exceeds the supply, firms increase the production providing there are spare resources put to work. Conversely, if supply exceeds the demand, firms reduces their output. Last but not the least, effective demand principle. According to this, since commodities are necessarily produced for a market, the size of the market must regulate the level of the commodity production. Finally, after studying both the models, the classical and the Keynesian model in detail, now let's discuss the differences between both the model, the Keynesian and the classical models of the economy. Classical economics, which is often referred to as the supply side economics, has its roots in 18th century writings. Adam Smith, David Ricardo and J.B. Say, who believed that unemployment was a natural part of the business cycle, which would self-correct without government intervention. High wages, they believed, caused unemployment, and that in the event of recession, unemployed workers would be willing to work for the lower wages. This would then encourage the firms to hire them, bringing the economy back to full employment and ending the recession. They are called as supply side economists because they did not believe that decreases in aggregate demand caused unemployment. The opposite would be Keynesian economics or demand side economics, which is practiced by most governments. Keynes believed that waiting would not work and that the only way to get the economy going again was through massive government spending and expansionary policies. Second point, classical economics teaches that in recession, prices, wages and interest rates would naturally fall, which would stimulate the demand and return the economy back to full employment equilibrium without the government intervention. The Keynesians, by contrast, believe that recession caused people's income to fall, causing them both spend less and save less. At the same time, businesses would invest less and produce less. And this slowdown would drive the economy deeper into recession rather than adjusting back to full employment. Talking about the third point, classical and laissez-faire economists believe that the best way for a government to handle a recession is to do nothing. If the government just waits, the same invisible hand which guides the economic equilibrium of supply, demand, price and employment under the normal circumstances would prevail in the face of a recession. Additionally, they believe that any intervention by the government would just make the situation worse, prolonging the recession. But the Keynesians believe that the government must take fiscal and monetary policy which will stimulate the economy. The Keynesian approach is much more popular among the politicians because it can show that they care and that they are taking the problem seriously. Additionally, the money they spend goes directly into the pockets of their constituents, securing votes for the next election. The massive government spending cuts in interest rates and taxes and the stimulates during the global financial crisis and the coronavirus lockdowns would be the examples of the Keynesian economics. Economists do not agree on whether classical economists or Keynesians are right, but they are all in the agreement that the expansionary government policies taken during these crises have driven up the national debt and decreased the value of money. So let's summarize the lecture, Post-Keynesian Economics. PKE, that is Post-Keynesian Economics, is a school of economics thought which builds upon John Maynard Keynes and Michael Kalinski's argument that effective demand is the key determinant of economic performance. For example, if all the individuals attempt to increase their savings simultaneously, total saving at the aggregate level may not increase because aggregate demand and output will decline. The principle of effective demand posits that economic activity is driven primarily by expenditure decisions. In particular, investment is held to be a key determinant of output, demand, and employment. In contrast to neoclassical, that is mainstream approach, investment is not constrained by the availability of savings, but may be constrained by the availability of the credit. So, investment decisions are regarded as driven at least in the part by animal spirits. As such, economic activity cannot be reduced in the outcome of some optimizing behavior, but instead depends upon expectations and sentiment, income distribution, and financial condition. PKE also has a distinctive take on monetary theory. This take focuses on holding the money as protection against uncertainty, that is liquidity preference, a money as a denominator of contrast, and the use of money as a means of payment. Money in the modern economy mostly consists of the bank deposits which are created by the commercial banks as a side effect of the lending decisions. The money supply is not, therefore, under the direct control of the central banks or the government. The flexibility of the monetary and financial system allows for the dynamism of capitalistic economies. Since credit can be used as a finance investment, but it can also give rise to the financial instability and credit-driven bubbles. In times of uncertainty, a rush of liquidity can result in higher interest rates and falling asset prices and hence to financial instability. So, PKE regards modern economies as a system of cash flows, not system of equilibrium between the real variables. Unlike neoclassical economics, PKE does not regard wage flexibility and labor market structural reforms as a route of full employment, but instead sees employment is a reflection of demand conditions in the goods market. As such, capitalistic economies have no automatic mechanisms towards full employment. So, PKE rejects the view that wage cuts can be used as a way to reduce the unemployment, since such cuts will lead to reductions in consumption expenditures and thus the aggregate demand. PKE holds that if this is the case, then the supply side cannot be considered in isolation but is likely to be affected by the demand conditions. The economy is a path-dependent system. PKE builds on the work of J.N. Keynes as well as the other key figures such as Michael Kalicki, John Robinson and Nicholas Kaldor. The term PKE came into use from since 1970 onwards when narrowing of the mainstream economics lead to the formation of PK academic journals and conferences. PKE rejects the need of optimizing micro foundations and the concept of long run supply side equilibrium. It highlights the possibility of financial instability and it regards involuntary unemployment as a normal feature of market economics that needs to be explained. PKE mainstreams that aggregate demand matters both in the short and the long run as well. So, this is all about today's session. I hope that all have found this session very helpful and informative. Thank you so much.